Intel's Pentium Dual Core. It's a bit of a weird one, isn't it? Because at this point in time, Core 2 Duos, Core 2 Quads, they are worthless and they are very cheap. I've never actually taken the time to see what these things can actually do, and given that I finished up early for the week, I was actually looking for another processor and stumbled across this one. So why don't we chuck this in a PC and actually see what this Pentium Dual Core E2140 is actually capable of, because the only thing I remember about them is the overclock. So I've already put the mesh PC on the desk because that is our best LGA 775 test system, and you know what, we do want to give this a decent chance of working, so this is a good PC to start with. I think we've got an Intel Xeon in here at the moment, which was a killer chip. Whack in this odd little Pentium Dual Core, and we'll just double check this does actually work. I do actually need a little bit of data from this Pentium Dual Core for an upcoming video I have planned on the final Pentium D. And from what I understand, at stock clocks, these are meant to more or less match one of those old school Pentium Ds, but at much lower power consumption and apparently oodles of overclocking headroom. But I've never taken the time to look at one, because why would you? So limitation number one that I've come across is it doesn't like booting with 8 gigs of RAM. If we take out 4 gigs, this will probably just boot straight up. You may have noticed I've actually put a better cooler on there, and that's because the stock cooler's pins have given up the ghost, but yeah, boots fine on 4 gigs. So I think what we're going to try and do is not let Windows boot, but try downclocking the RAM a little bit and see if it's happier at slower speeds. Turns out iGo coolers from China, the cheap £5 ones, still support LGA 775, so if you're looking for cheap LGA 775 coolers, I was looking on Amazon last night and they were like 40-50 quid. But these £5 from China, 4 heat pipes, actual copper plating and a fan, £5 and it works on 775. The weird thing that's bugging me about the memory is that the memory controller is not actually on the processor. But anyway, let's see. It might be because it's set to an overclock profile. What we'll do is we'll just leave it all automatic, set RAM speed lower at 800 megahertz, see if it'll boot on that, and then we'll try giving it 8 gigs of RAM again. And now we are hopefully running with 8 gigs of RAM. Let's just double check. Pentium Dual Core E2140, 8 gigs of RAM installed. We can do some overclocking later, but it doesn't seem very happy about RAM speeds. These are just things that happen with older computers. It's certainly not the speediest thing in the world when it comes to booting. I have got a little bit too used to these old Xeons on 775, which blew me away with the level of performance these still have, but this is more of a realistic 775 scenario. And how's it doing? Just sat at the desktop? Yeah, 100% CPU load. So yeah, this is what you get. You get the Pentium Dual Core E2140, which is slightly clocked up a little bit compared to some of the older ones, and it runs with 2 cores at 1.6 GHz. It's nothing fancy, but hey, it does actually have 2 cores. It also keeps dropping out the screen, probably because it's trying to install drivers. I do want to give it a quick test here on Windows 10 with its stock performance, so I'm going to whack in some sort of actual graphics card that we might want to use. I'm just going to grab something out the cupboard and then we'll go from there. We'll decide what kind of graphics card we want to throw into the PC today. So I have whacked in a Quadro M4000. It's like a GTX 970 but with 8 gigs of VRAM. Great card if you can get a hold of one at the moment. To be fair, it has some really lightweight drivers. Running DDU to uninstall the drivers that were already on this OS took, probably about 25 minutes, half an hour. We will probably do a little bit of legacy Windows testing. We'll probably do a little bit of Linux testing. It's not doing too great out of the box. I mean, it's usable. I'm hoping once we get some drivers on here, it'll be a little bit better. I mean, you saw just then, Windows Defender was just using up 50% of the processor, an entire core on this, to scan the file before we're allowed to open it. We'll see how it performs out of the box, see if it can do absolutely anything, and then we're going to try and overclock this. Because one of the big things people used to do back in the day, and I put out a community poll asking people about if they remember the Pentium Dual Core, and a lot of people are talking about overclocking. Turns out, the one thing people remember about these is they were cheap, and if you clocked them high enough, they went from being a bit of a mediocre experience to something you wouldn't mind actually using. We are still unzipping drivers though. While the drivers are installing in the background though, this is just a Conroe based E2140. I actually don't remember what system this came in. If anyone does remember, please do let me know. But it's got a decent amount of instructions, goes up to SSE 3. You do actually get 1 whole megabyte of L2 cache, and it is pretty much staying locked at 1600 megahertz right now. The reason for that, it's trying to install drivers in the modern world. It's just what it's going to do. It's not using much in the way of voltage. I don't imagine temperatures are all too high. So yeah, with the big old iGo cooler on there, it's running at 35 degrees, peaks of 36 under full load. So I can't imagine thermals are going to be a problem for us in the slightest, which is probably good because we do need some overclocking headroom. So yeah, it hovers around 34 to 35 at 80% utilization, and at 100% it goes up to 36. So we have more than enough cooling for this little Pentium. I can't wait to get this overclocked because as it stands at the moment, everything is a chore. We've had to unzip Steam, at least the update files, which took anywhere from about 15 to 20 minutes. Then everything seemed good, but now we're in the process of it loading the UI for 3D Mark. So I can just run a physics test, that's all I want to do. Just run one simple and nice physics test. It'll get there. It is doing something right, it's not crashed. Yeah, it's slowly ticking up. Using an entire core. I know this is particularly brutal because this is the modern day, but you've got to remember, Core 2 quads, probably most Core 2 duos, which is something we will go back and look at some point, do run Windows 10 IoT fine. It's here, finally. System information not available, don't care, just run a physics test. It is doing it. Just really slowly. Given that this is actually a really intensive and quite modern benchmark, it is powering through. It's between 3 to 6 frames per second in terms of processing speed. It is not yet anywhere near as bad as it's going to get. But you know what? For a little old Pentium Dual Core out of the box, when it eventually does get around to loading the application, or in this case the benchmark, it is kind of admirable. It's only got 1 megabyte of cache, so it can only do so much. Well, I can safely say that this is actually the worst CPU score we have ever actually seen. It starts off strong when there's not too much to do, and then a combination of lack of cores and lack of cache means that it all just sort of falls apart. Fortunately, in terms of thermals, it didn't really get too hot, because this thing is having to do, well, pretty much nothing. This is actually the worst CPU we've tested on the channel with modern benchmarking styles. Anyway, let's throw it up into a game, see if it's any better, and we'll go from there, see if there's any degree of improvement. I am trying to load up a game, because back in the day, I do remember GTA 5 actually working on these, but a lot has changed since then. Namely, Windows is a lot more bloated than it used to be, even the IoT versions aren't as efficient as Windows 7. The Rockstar launcher is now bloatware, rather than just something to access your friends list, and all of these factors just mean that the processor is not having a very good time, because we've been trying to enter story mode now for about 20 minutes. I had to restart the entire computer because it was too slow to actually install BattlEye, and we've now gone backwards. It's actually loading in reverse. Originally... no? Initializing? No, it's just now struggling to verify that I own the game. Well, in an hour's time I'll rejoin you and hopefully we should be able to show you the gaming prowess of the Pentium Dual Core in 2026. If it doesn't work, I'm just going... It's actually got Xbox controls down the bottom. A settings menu. If it took 20 minutes to get to the settings menu, how long is it going to take to get in game? Why is it defaulted to all ultra? It is very difficult to control these menus. Restart, apply, do your thing, and in an hour's time when we're actually in-game, I will return and let you know how well it works. It's taken near enough forever. I've had to get rid of Explorer.exe in the background, but here we have it. GTA 5 running on the Pentium Dual Core at its stock settings. I don't dare bring up MSI Afterburner. I don't dare bring up Fraps. I don't want to bring up anything. What I can tell you at the moment is it's getting around actually more frames per second than I thought it would do. It's getting about 15 or so FPS, which isn't actually that bad. And to be fair, sometimes it does actually stabilize in and around maybe 20 frames per second. I mean, the frame drops are spectacularly awful. Genuinely, it's dropping down to about 0 most of the time. It's running in a tiny little window and the processor is completely maxed out. It's using pretty much 100% of it. You know what? We're fine for memory usage and we're fine for graphics usage. Yeah, this is the kind of gaming experience you're going to get in 2026 on a Pentium Dual Core. But the big redeeming factor of these is that they overclock. And I was hoping to do this about 3 hours ago, but as is the case with these rather basic 775 processors, well, the world is loading in the background, everything takes about 10 times longer than you think it would. Let's get into the BIOS and let's actually start tweaking this thing around. Right, so if we go to manual mode, yeah, I don't think it's going to post. I think we're going to be limited by the fact our RAM speed is giving us no options. Well, that is stable, but it's also not much of an overclock. CPU-Z is reporting at around 2 GHz, but that's still really quite bad. This board really isn't designed for overclocking in the slightest, so yeah, we'll see what we can do on it, but I can't promise miracles. And as if a week hadn't passed already, we're back with the Pentium Dual Core. And in that time I've tried buying a new and actually quite high-end motherboard, which was dead on arrival. So instead I have found a slightly okay Gigabyte G41 board, which it's not great, but it can overclock better than the Asus one can. And I've also plonked a giant AMD Wraith cooler on top of it. We should actually be able to get into the BIOS, actually start overclocking, and see if we can eke out some better performance. I mean, it's a much more basic looking BIOS, but hey, if it works, it works. So if we run that, that should just be a basic 2 GHz overclock, and then we can start pushing voltages and start pushing other bits. We just want to make sure that this board is a little bit more stable with overclocking, because the whole point of these Pentium chips is virtually all of the old school boards can overclock these. But also, loads of the old school boards are now dead. This puts us in the fun situation of trying to overclock on whatever I've got left lying around that does actually work. I mean, it's nothing crazy impressive, but it's by simply moving to a just slightly better Gigabyte motherboard. It seems stable at 2.6 GHz, which doesn't sound like a crazy high clock speed. I mean, these are capable of a lot more. But the thing is, being able to gain an extra gigahertz out of one of these quite easily, you know, most boards would be able to do this. Anything actually better than the types of boards that I've got on hand that still work, easily be able to get more speed out of them than this. But still, we've gone from 1.6 GHz up to 2.6 on a basic motherboard, which is kind of the selling point of these Pentium dual cores. We've eked out pretty solid additional performance, and it hasn't taken very long. It's only taken this long because I kept wanting to do more than I was able to with the parts I had on hand. But I'm going to run this through a quick physics test, make sure it's stable. I can tell you now, it ain't getting hot, not with that AMD Wraith cooler on there. The memory's running at around 1066 MHz, which will probably net us a few extra points. And performance, I mean, around the desktop is feeling a lot snappier. GTA 5 is also kinda bad. I mean, I don't really know what we were expecting. There is so much bloat going on with something like GTA 5 these days. But yeah, I mean, it's a good showcase of what I'm talking about, because by applying even a simple overclock to this, we've gone from uncontrollable to, look, the world's actually loading in. And yeah, it's a bit stuttery, but hey, we've only got 2 cores and it's trying to do an awful lot. I don't think there's going to be much point testing this out in the modern day. I mean, we can give it a go real quick and see how it holds up. But as it stands, with the overclock we've got at the moment on this board, it's not going to be able to do a great deal in the modern day. Still, I'll load up into a couple of games. We'll take a quick look at some modern gaming on the Pentium Dual Core, and we'll just have a little bit of fun with it, take a little bit of a look at it, and then I think we're going to whack on something like Windows 7 and give this a bit more of a chance, because I think with an older graphics card, something a bit more basic, and an offline copy of GTA 5, it could probably get about 30 to 40 frames per second. They used to back in the day, but it's just pegged at 100% utilization. Anyway, we'll try something else, see if there's anything remotely modern it can do, but I'm not exactly holding out a huge deal. Now, I'm pretty optimistic that Mount & Blade Bannerlord has a smidge of a chance of working. This was never a powerful processor back in the day. Maybe there's a chance. Do say it's probably going to take forever to load, so I don't know why I started recording before we actually got in game. It's not like the Core 2 Duo, it's not like the Core 2 Quad, it's not like the Xeons. It's just not going to survive modern day gaming. It's fun to see, but rather than spend an eternity laughing at it, I'd rather see what it can actually do. Well, here we have it, Mount & Blade Bannerlord, and it is a simple scenario, only a small battle going on, but for a modern game, it is getting anywhere from sort of 30 to 60 FPS. I mean, there are some heavy frame drops in there, but I'd imagine once it stabilizes, it's gonna hit in and around 60 frames per second. I mean, the 1% lows are downright awful, but given that we've gone from GTA 5 at sort of 15 to 20 frames per second to, you know what, Bannerlord ain't exactly gonna have pretty frame times, but it will hit 60 FPS on average. That's actually a really good showing for the Pentium Dual Core. This has given me the slightest smidge of hope that maybe there are some slightly more modern things this could run. I think this really is about the limit of what it can do, but you know what, it's sometimes nice just to go, you know, a bit of a send-off. I mean, if my good 775 board had arrived, we could overclock this even further, but as it stands today, this is the best board I've got. And a 1 GHz overclock ain't bad, but it does mean that this is looking like the limit of the gaming you can do. To be fair, now the frame rate's stabilized. It's actually not that bad to play. I mean, I could get away with playing this. They're going to be small battles. It's going to be ugly graphics, but you know what? It's going to be around 60 frames per second, which isn't an experience I thought we'd be getting today in any sort of recent title. So I'm happy with that. Yeah, M&B Bannerlord actually surprisingly works fine as long as you're running your Pentium Dual Core with an overclock, which is not something I think any of us saw coming today. That's actually a really genuine surprise. Now, this really is a bit of an interesting benchmark because even towards the end of CSGO's life, the idea of recommending people play it on something like a Core 2 Duo was getting a little bit sketchy, and then we're at the point where this is actually worse than a Core 2 Duo, and even with the 1 GHz overclock. I mean, yes, it is a very single-threaded game, but I mean, it is struggling here. We are in an online competitive match, and we're getting, now it's stabilizing anywhere from sort of 25 to 45 frames per second, which is not great. It's controllable. It is a low frame rate. It's definitely more equipped to something in a vein of like Counter-Strike Source rather than CS:GO. But you know what? It's not actually too bad at all. It is controllable. Play through it. We'll see if we can play through a round. We'll see if we can win. We probably won't. But yeah, it's not the end of the world. It must be said, it's certainly controllable, but I wouldn't exactly recommend to start your CSGO competitive career by utilizing a Pentium Dual Core. Even if it is overclocked, it is not a great experience. I will see if it can launch the latest release of BeamNG, but I don't think it's going to be able to. So yeah, unfortunately we're going to run into this problem more and more. Even games like BeamNG that don't require an external launcher beyond Steam, they don't have much bloat going on in the background. Yeah, you're just going to run into status illegal instruction because we don't have the instruction sets for it. It is the sad reality of the Pentium Dual Core in the modern day. It doesn't have the cache for it, it doesn't have the cores for it, and even if you give it the clocks for it, it hasn't got the instructions to back them up. So I think to save this, before we give up, why don't we take a little look at Linux? So I think that's going to be our next port of call, is we try Linux on here. It'll be more lightweight day to day, and we can see if maybe it has a chance of doing anything, and if it doesn't, we'll go back to a legacy version of Windows. We might as well get the modern options out of the way first. Probably also means we shouldn't use an NVIDIA graphics card. Gotta love some R9 Nano action going on here. Really one of the most perfect cards for testing these old legacy systems, and modern Linux drivers, so no problems there. Alright, let's get this turned on, get it booted up to Linux, get Windows unplugged completely, and let's get started on Linux. In terms of overall speed, yeah, if you're going to be using one of these at all in the modern day, I don't know why you would be, because everything else on this platform is so cheap. It is very, very speedy over on Linux. If you're just looking for day-to-day experience, we are literally just running the R9 Fury with the Pentium Dual Core with the overclock. We've got the RAD-V drivers on here, so AMD GPU, and it is much snappier. I don't think it's going to be revolutionary in the modern day over on Linux, but it might have a little bit of a better chance. Once again, I can't promise miracles because day-to-day usage is perfect. You know, just to prove that, you know, snapping about the desktop is running on the Pentium Dual Core. We've got elementary OS 8, and it is running with the Pentium Dual Core at 2.667 GHz, so with the overclock, R9 Fury Nano series with the RAD-V drivers. We are pretty much golden here on Linux. Still, let's Steam run, let's Steam update. It's still going to take a second or so to do these types of things, but it's not too bad. You almost can't go wrong with starting testing with Half-Life 2. I'd imagine this will be completely maxed out in the settings menu. Yep, completely maxed out here. And I want to say the Pentium Dual Core, even with a Proton translation layer, should handle this with no problems. I mean, yeah, 1% lows aren't exactly amazing. We are actually getting a few frame drops, but this is still Half-Life 2 completely maxed out, running through a Proton translation layer. I don't want to get out of this section, see how it deals with some of the more intense physics effects, but this is what I mean about the physics effects. If there is going to be one area that's going to stress it, it'll be this bit here. And yeah, it brings us down to around 40 FPS, 1% lows down to the sort of low 30s. Overall, not actually a terrible experience given this is the latest version of Half-Life 2 running. That is the one thing, you know, Linux is not always the go-to solution in every regard, but in terms of a supported operating system you can just bung on here, and it will play games, I can't really argue with it too much. So Half-Life 2, no problems. I don't think this is gonna go very well, but I have loaded up into a bit of the MasterChef collection just to sort of round off Linux testing, because I mean, Half-Life 2 sort of already told us everything we needed to know. It'll do it, but Proton translation layers are certainly going to take their toll on something that was never particularly powerful upon their release date. I genuinely thought it'd be worse. We're getting about maybe 5 to 10 frames per second. I don't think it's going to get any better for some reason. I have got this weird issue where my keyboard isn't working. You don't need me to move around to be able to tell you that, yeah. I think we've already found the limits of gaming on Linux, and if you don't mind just using it for web browsing, it is pretty much perfect. I mean, it is controllable, it is a bit of a slideshow at around 10 to 12 frames per second, but it's actually not uncontrollable. This is with the lowest settings, but yeah, at the same time, if we're talking about real-world practicalities of gaming, then your limits are around the Half-Life 2 era sort of thing. It's not gonna deal with, like, the MasterChef collection or anything from that era onwards, because it's just asking too much. I mean, look, 100% CPU utilization just to give us around 15 frames per second, and I think a lot of that is translation layers. There's not much you can do about it. But if you just want to use it as a system, if you just want to browse the web, if you just want to do bits and pieces like that, and you're on an old Pentium Dual Core, I don't know why you would be, because there's plenty of other cheap upgrades available. In fact, as a platform, 775 is probably more expensive than some of the easier and cheaper options, but yeah, it'll load the web pretty speedily, it'll do all this fine. You can load the specs for an Intel Xeon X5460. But yeah, look, you could browse the web, fine. Like, it'll browse the web, you can have multiple tabs open, you can open up Steam, it's gonna be speedy. As a computer, use Linux. It'll be okay on Windows 10 IoT, but Linux will be a smoother experience. The thing is though, if you're someone that's genuinely looking at using the Pentium Dual Core, and if we're going to give this a chance, we need a legacy version of Windows. Now, I want to say a little while ago, I actually put Windows 8.1 fully updated on this SSD. The reason I did that is because it should actually just work in all systems without having to be reinstalled, and is really lightweight. People seem to love Windows 8.1. I'm still a bit iffy on it, but you know what? It's a good excuse for us to take a quick look at it and see how it is actually holding up. Okay, well, there is Windows on here. That looks like Windows 8.1. Yeah, and this is the sort of thing. So Windows 8.1 could configure itself to new PCs in the same way that Windows 10 and 11 can, with this whole getting devices ready thing, but you don't have to go through the pain of reinstalling it every single time. So a bit like how I've already got pre-set up Windows 10 IoT and pre-set up Linux, we can have pre-set up Windows 8. This should be a lightweight experience, and we can whack in an older graphics card and see if we give it lower driver overheads, an older operating system, if maybe it can do anything. And yeah, I mean, here we are, Windows 8.1 Pro build 9600. Out of the box, we're using 4% of the processor, 1 gig of memory, and our C drive is just pinging up as and when it needs to. It's an old SSD and it's not struggling. But yeah, no trickery or anything going on. Windows 8.1 is genuinely this smooth to use on older hardware, which is one of the reasons why I was going to try and get a version of it set up. Suddenly, we've gone from being like, oh, it struggles in Windows 10 even with an overclock, oh, Linux is just about okay, to you boot up an older version of Windows and you go, oh, I get it a little bit. This thing's quick. I mean, look at it, it's just downloading things like that, no problems. I've not even got graphics drivers on here and it's not even struggling. It lets you understand the real opinions people had back in the day. I'm a big fan of using Linux, I'm a big fan of using the IoT versions of Windows, but sometimes you can't beat the authentic, older version of Windows experience. You've got drivers, you've got no overheads, it's running at maybe 20 to 30% utilization doing Steam. It was at 70 to 80%, admittedly pre-overclock, in Windows 10 doing the exact same thing. Nice little test here, extracting files. To be fair, this part is very similar to how it was over on Windows 10. Yeah, 1 megabyte of cache, L2 only, and unzipping files, especially modern files, not great. And you know what? I'll take any excuse I can to bust out the GTX 480, because we're just having fun with this video. So yeah, why not? Windows 8.1 GTX 480, it should work well. Generally, I found Fermi cards to have really, really low overheads, so this will give it another little bit of an advantage. Not only is it not going to have to run modern Windows or modern Linux, it also gets to run some slightly more period-accurate drivers, which, I mean, given that we got support for everything up to DirectX 12, should actually help. And that should be all we need. That should just turn on and be loud, obnoxious, annoying, but also should offer us good performance. I mean, we're just making sure everything works. I have got Steam working on Windows 8, and I will show you how. So yes, if you've got brave ideas like myself, and you are coming around to the idea that keeping a Windows 8.1 drive set up for legacy testing is a good idea, then you're kind of on the right track, because it is very speedy to use. And if you want Steam to work, get yourself an ISO, get it fully up to date like I've done, and the only thing you really need to do is on your Steam target, add CEF disable sandbox, and that will fix a GL driver query error that prevents Steam from launching the login page. You do that, it works absolutely fine. Pretty much the same as Windows 7. You're not going to be able to run downloads, but hey, let's be honest, Steam will stop running on Windows 8.1 in 0 days. It's been there for a while. But I'm going to close Steam. Because yes, we can get Rockstar launching GTA 5 on a system like this. That's quite hot actually. But it is going to be much easier if we just launch Fraps, and we're going to launch an offline copy of GTA 5, because that's the thing we want to see, is we know it'll be able to do GTA 5 probably similar to Windows 10 if we were to run the new and updated version. But how's it going to manage a version which isn't having to deal with all the bloat in the background? So let's get into GTA 5 and see if maybe Windows 8 gives the Pentium Dual Core a shot of getting this running. Right, so still no messing around. We've still got the Pentium Dual Core E2140. It is running at 2.67 GHz, and we have GTA 5 running with a contemporary operating system, an older graphics card, and it's not looking too bad at the moment. We are just running with normal and high settings, which is what it defaults to on a GTX 480, one that is certainly getting a bit toasty now, and you know, it's not terrible. It's a bit like Bannerlord was earlier, where it's a 60 FPS average, we can see that. But the thing is, the 1% lows are definitely suffering. So really, we need some sort of 30 FPS cap in place. I might just implement a 30 FPS cap now, otherwise it is going to be very wayward. Oh yeah, and that's a lot better. That is running at a capped 30 frames per second from a Pentium Dual Core. It's got rid of all that stuttering that was going on earlier. If you weren't familiar with these processors and didn't know that an older operating system and older graphics cards with lower drive overhead meant that you could actually run titles like this, you take a look at that Windows 10 performance and go, it's impossible. You've overclocked it by a gigahertz. It's on a modern system with a modern graphics card. This is terrible. But the reality is, it really isn't. But I am just going to play through this entire section. We'll get to the next area because the prologue is quite easy to run. It does make you think that even on modern systems that have got plenty of processing power, just how much performance are we leaving on the table by bloated graphics drivers, modern launchers and software? Because when you strip all that away and you go back to a more bare bones experience, this is fine. Now, driving is going to put a bit of load on things, but still at that 30 FPS mark, it really isn't struggling at all. It is better, it is much closer to 30 frames per second than it was before, but there's definitely a bit of stuttering going on. I mean, it's not the end of the world, it's actually calming down a lot now. It's back up to 30 frames per second. It might have just been while things were loading in. I mean, we are loading in on a SATA 1 port. It's by no means perfect, but it is eking out close enough to 30 frames per second with hitches and stutters, which overall is a much better situation than we were in before. It's still struggling to load in the world, but hey, there's things you could do if you really wanted to eke out some extra performance. I'm just going to say though, it is controllable. You could quite comfortably play it like this. I'm just going to play through this segment here. GTA 5 works. I suppose what we do from here is carry on with the rest of the video. So we've already seen an awful lot of the Pentium Dual Core. I mean, we've seen it across 3 different operating systems. We've seen Linux, we've seen Windows, we've seen legacy testing, we've seen 2 different systems, and we've seen an attempt at another motherboard. But just what are the specifications of Intel's Pentium Dual Core E2140? It's based on the Allendale architecture, being on the 65nm process, and comes in with rather lackluster specifications. 2 cores and 2 threads at 1.6 GHz, 64 KB of L1 cache per core, and
and a shared total of 1 megabyte of L2 cache, no L3 cache in sight. The thing is though, when you look at the rest of the features, you kinda get why. See, it utilizes very little power. You have to remember these came out not too long after the Pentium D. In fact, there are certain Pentium D chips that came out alongside this. While this utilizes virtually no power at all, you'll very rarely see this thing actually use a full 65 watts, and given it was released in June 2007, you did get at the time up-to-date SSE3 support and a very low release price, selling as low as £50 in the UK and $75 over in the States. That's right, you pretty much got something that matched the higher-end Intel Pentium D chips as an entry level into the world of Pentium Dual Cores. And of course, you could overclock these things like we've done earlier. Yes, they start off at a measly 1.6 GHz, but bumping them up to 2.6 GHz was easily done on a G41 motherboard, and if you had anything that was remotely competent, you could push these things even further. Today, these things are e-waste. There's no point even putting down a price because people just don't want these. Core 2 Duos and Core 2 Quads are very cheap, Intel Xeons are still very cheap, and it means that there's very little reason to go out of your way to buy one of these. So the only reason to look at these is out of the fun of tweaking and the nostalgia for them, because yes, they were a budget chip, but people certainly were fond of them. Now, of course, one of the killer features of these was that you could overclock, and I've run it through some synthetic testing just to give you an idea of how much this improves things across a few different gradients. So, when it's stock settings, we achieved 383 in a TimeSpy physics score, which is not great, but not awful when you remember this is such an ancient chip with only 2 cores and hardly any cache. Bumping this up to 2.1 GHz did help things, bringing it up to 401, and with the testing speed today, which is 2.6 GHz, which needed a smidge more voltage than stock, it ran at 445, so a substantial increase in performance, but I do think a lot of this was more from setting up the RAM correctly by moving to a different motherboard than anything else. So yes, if you actually had a better setup than this, you could potentially eke out more clock speed. Then again, you'll probably run into other limitations before that really matters. Still, if we throw this up into a comparison of other processors, at least since we updated the way that we benchmark processors on the channel, we can see that we have a new low spot, with the Pentium Dual Core E2140 showing up at the very bottom. Honestly, there's very little on here that I'd be willing to actually compare it to, but the Intel X5460 is an LGA 771 Xeon and is absolutely destroying this. Makes sense, it's got 4 cores, 12 megabytes of cache, it's pretty much as good as you could get over in the world of LGA 775, but given that was a $1,200 processor, and this is one that you could pick up from $50 to $75 on launch, it's fair to say that, you know what, getting a quarter of that performance, at least available to you, isn't actually too bad for the money you're spending, so I'm trying to be optimistic with this. Now, given we've already seen the system up against the world of Windows 10 paired with a 980 Ti, we've seen it over in the world of Linux with an R9 Fury Nano. But just where is the Pentium Dual Core sweet spot? Well, I do think it is when you're running a contemporary version of Windows like Windows 8.1. So we got the system set up here today with 8GB of DDR3 RAM running at 1066 MHz. We've got it paired with a GTX 480, which sounds a bit strange given the GTX 480's reputation, but it does benefit from being actually really quite powerful and able to run quite a lot of titles you wouldn't expect it to be, and also having really low driver overheads. So we are really giving the Pentium Dual Core the best chance it's got. Now, it is running that 2.6 GHz overclock, which should give us a substantial boost over some of the early performance we saw, but I really don't know how this Pentium Dual Core's actually going to fare. Keep in mind I do need some data on this for an actual upcoming video that is a bit more exciting than this one, but still, there are a lot of people out there that love the Pentium Dual Core and are probably quite eager to see how it's holding up in the modern day. So I've done the best job I have, well, at least the best job I can do, trying to put this up against the modern world with the benchmarks. Now, starting on the benchmarks, we do have GTA 5 running with the normal settings, but it's also running offline, which is more equivalent to how it would have ran back in the day when the Rockstar launcher was actually just the social club, so it was a tiny DRM that ran in the background for you to access your friends list. Unfortunately, these older or more legacy systems that used to handle it fine back in the day, well, they just can't run the latest versions, we've already seen that. However, if you do run the game with normal settings and offline and with a 30 FPS cap in place, which was done externally through MSI Afterburner, we did also close Explorer.exe to give it the best chance possible, and we also set the game to high priority. A lot of the time when you weren't in heavy action or moving too quickly across the map, you would get 30 frames per second. The problem is, of course, those 1% lows were pretty much frequent and constant, but this was more to do with the game trying to load in so much on a dual-core processor, especially one that doesn't really have much going for it. So yes, you can eke out a playable GTA 5 experience, people used to back in the day, but the thing is, you will certainly get those frame drops in places, which is something that, well, people used to put up with it back in the day. I remember plenty of people playing it on systems like this, and if you upgraded from one of these Pentium Dual Cores up to a Core 2 Duo or even a Core 2 Quad, then you'd get a much better experience. But as an entry-level baseline for an old chip from 2007, it's not actually a terrible showing. Next up, I did launch BeamNG, which you can get running on these older versions of Windows and these older systems, provided you don't mind going back to an older version of the game. So this is the last supported version that will run on Windows 7, and because this is also the last supported version that will usually run on Windows 8 and Windows 8.1. And with the lowest settings in the jungle map, things weren't exactly looking too great. We saw 14 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 8 FPS, which is sort of where I'd expect the performance of this to be. There's a lot of physics effects going on, this can be quite a demanding game, and even this older Windows 7 version can look really nice at higher settings, something the GTX 480 could likely manage, but this Pentium Dual Core, it's not going to be able to handle the physics of the game alone, yet alone all the shadows and fancy effects going on. Unfortunately, it didn't matter when we changed back to simpler maps like The Hill, it was still unplayable. It just refused to load in the world. I tried restarting the game, I tried restarting the system, and for some reason, it just was really unhappy about BeamNG to the stage where all of the maps you loaded into would work about the same, but only the jungle map would actually load in what was around you. All the others would sort of give you a rough idea of what the geometry was like, it'd have all the physics enabled, but there wasn't enough headroom left over to actually load in the rest of the textures, so you'd end up through a rather odd-looking space. Now, I know we did see a bit of Counter-Strike Go earlier when we were running Windows 10, but do we get more stable performance when we take away some of those overheads? Well, actually, this is a more intensive scenario than what we tested earlier, given that I went into an offline match. I was having difficulties with the internet and it didn't want me to connect to an actual server. You can get it to work via direct connects, and we nearly got there, and it timed out at the last moment, so we're just testing offline. But just how does the Pentium Dual Core deal with CSGO in its final form? Well, it deals with it about as well as I remember, with competitive settings in 1080p netting you 38 FPS on average, but actually okay 1% lows down to 33 frames per second, which is not exactly a great experience, but once again, I'm sure all of us will remember someone that was running one of these low-end 775 systems and was playing Counter-Strike Go with you at around 30 frames per second, so it's good to know it can still manage it in the modern day. Now, we are lacking the instruction sets to be able to launch something like Counter-Strike 2, however Black Mesa, which really pushes the Source 1 engine to its complete limits, is really reminiscent of its performance in its later sections to that of Counter-Strike 2 in certain instances, so it's kind of a good replacement. With low settings when running the Zen level, which is about as intensive as this game gets, things were on the verge of playability. Don't get me wrong, it was controllable, and we got in and around 30 frames per second when not much was going on. This would then hover to the low 20s when you're in combat, but the Zen sections of this game are ridiculously intensive. I really doubt they factored in the Pentium Dual Core into the actual Steam release, but I do remember running this as a mod back in the day on a Pentium Dual Core laptop and did eke out in and around 30 to 40 frames per second, so probably not too dissimilar to this in the early days. If you go back to play through any of the earlier levels, for example the intro train ride, which is still more intensive than general gameplay given that you've got different bits going on and some wider expansive areas, but we still returned 52 FPS on average, with once again not too bad 1% lows down to 39 frames per second. So miraculously Black Mesa is playable, but I do think that overclock is doing some heavy lifting. Whenever I go back to these older operating system tests, one of the things that is always requested is Metal Gear Solid 5. And why? Well, it defaulted to a mixture of medium and high settings in 900p. I didn't want to touch the resolution because really we were CPU bound in all instances, but just to make sure I did leave the resolution as that. And we returned 31 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 27 frames per second. Metal Gear Solid 5 sort of decides if it's going to run at 30 FPS or 60 FPS and does its best job of keeping the game running smooth, so you don't really need to implement a cap or anything like that, the game sort of does it for you. But the Pentium Dual Core, this budget processor from 2007, is able to eke out decent visuals because some of these effects do actually have some load on the processor and give you in and around 30 frames per second. So Metal Gear Solid 5 and the Fox engine, we already knew it was optimized, but I didn't think it would run this well on a Pentium Dual Core, given that a lot of other things are struggling to get anywhere near this type of frame rate without these levels of visuals. With Skyrim, I did actually start off with the Anniversary Edition because you can't run the latest Anniversary version of Fallout 4, so I thought that's a good substitute, and it actually started off showing some really solid performance. But the thing is, it would also shut down the entire system, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I checked the power supply, I checked the graphics card, I checked the VRMs, I tried it without an overclock, and it would do the same thing every time, and I started looking into this as a problem, and there was people talking about this on 775 systems about 5 to 10 years ago, which is such a weird thing. It doesn't make sense because these people are also running with much better systems than this. They're running Core 2 quads and GTX 580s, good Corsair power supplies. I mean, I'm running a decent 700 watt, and it was turning off their entire computer because according to what people's research was showing is it causes massive voltage spikes that can turn off lower end 775 boards. If anyone's ever heard of this or can confirm it, please do let me know because it does genuinely look like that's what it's doing. Because the system was fine running the original Skyrim. We got 37 FPS on average, ultra settings 1080p, 1% lows down to 31, but we couldn't run the Anniversary Edition. It would just shut down the entire system for seemingly no reason. Given this is a video about a processor, we did run RimWorld version 1.6, which does actually help with multi-threading, especially on modern processors, and we've seen Core 2 quads of this era actually benefit from this update. Unfortunately, this is still a Pentium Dual Core, and running the latest version of RimWorld will launch on the system. However, when running at 4 times speed, we saw an average around 20 frames per second and 1% lows down to 12 FPS. Honestly, in terms of tick rate, it wasn't much quicker than 2 times speed given this was a medium-sized colony, so yes, you can still play RimWorld on your Pentium Dual Core. The only thing is, you're going to want a lightweight operating system, small maps, and a tiny colony, because anything beyond this, I mean, it'll be playable, but it's going to be very slow, because once you get much further than the stage we're at here, I would imagine even 1 times speed is going to be slowing down. So, yeah, RimWorld runs, but your tick rate's going to suffer. Given that KSP seems to have had some sort of recent resurgence, it's quite nice to see that it will still run, even in its final form, on even a measly Pentium Dual Core. Makes sense, I used to run this on a Pentium M laptop back in the day with a lot of tweaking, keep in mind, and it was an early alpha build, but here with low and medium settings we were able to eke out 38 frames per second and 1% lows down to 33. Now, larger ships and simulations would bring this in and around to the mid-20 FPS range, the same with when anything sort of physics-based was going on, and Time Warp, when you were actually running with physics enabled, would actually have a degree of slowdown. The thing is though, when you're actually out in space, when you're in simpler environments, it would run anywhere from 50 to 70 frames per second, so KSP runs fine. I mean, it's never going to be immaculate, but it's good enough to play, even if you are running it on a Pentium Dual Core. And once again, I don't doubt that overclock is doing a lot of heavy lifting. And you know where's a nice place to finish these benchmarks? Given that we saw M&B Bannerlord run pretty much flawlessly over on Windows 10, I mean, it did have some really bad 1% lows, what if you throw it up into something like the most intensive version of Mount & Blade Warband with Vikings Conquest? The game defaulted to medium and high settings, but in a similar vein to the second game, these settings don't make too much of a difference on actual load on the processor. So it was actually not too bad. We did have to have a smaller battle size set at 60 people, but with this all in place, yeah, it runs at 60 frames per second. There was no frame caps or anything, that is just in and around the frame rate you'll get out of this. Averages of 61, really solid frame times down to 54 frames per second, and yeah, it goes to show the Pentium Dual Core, yeah, it can do a bit of modern-ish gaming, but its golden era is games from its era. The engines that use around 2 cores, they run perfectly fine because you've got 2 cores and they're not being too heavy on the cache, and all we're doing by bumping up those clocks with the overclock is to just simply give it a bit more headroom, which in instances like this means it will get 60 frames per second. So in terms of overall performance, it's about what I expected from a Pentium Dual Core. When you start getting to anything from sort of the mid-2010s, it does begin to struggle quite heavily. I mean, GTA 5, you can eke out the classic 30 FPS but stuttery experience that I'm sure most Pentium Dual Core owners were familiar with, but hey, it is at least controllable, and to be fair, those stutters do die down when you're not moving incredibly fast, so GTA 5 will eventually get itself to a stage where it is playable. When you start getting much newer than this, you start running into problems with instruction sets. I mean, most titles that used to launch back in the day, something like Counter-Strike Go, even when you launch them up on Windows 8.1 with an older graphics card and nothing running in the background, they went from being around a 60 FPS experience when the game was new, to now a 30 to 40 FPS experience with the latest release. They do still run, but they're not exactly going to blow you away. Where the Pentium Dual Core does excel was of games of its era. You throw up into Mount & Blade Warband, which is very reminiscent of a game from that sort of 2007 period, although it came out slightly after that, and it'll work perfectly fine. Lots of indie games from the mid-2010s that were always designed with these lower-end systems in mind will work beautifully, and there's no problems whatsoever. And it really is just a chip of its time. It was designed to do nothing more than be an introduction to the new core architecture and get you away from the Pentium 4s and Pentium Ds, and it essentially offered similar performance to them, but without the power consumption or the price tag, and I can't really hate it for that. So there we have it, Intel's first Pentium Dual Core, and really this was one of the first Pentium Dual Cores because the earlier ones were laptop chips and we're talking about the real full-fat desktop thing, and you know what, I went into this expecting the worst, to be honest, and in modern Windows it's not far off that. You're talking about 10 to 15 FPS in GTA 5, but surprisingly decent Bannerlord performance to be fair. And I really can't see any reason why anyone would be using one of these unless it is out of nostalgia and the fun of tweaking them around, because I did have a lot of fun getting this overclocked and actually just seeing just what it could do. And it's a fairly competent retro chip if you're running something, think Windows XP, Windows Vista, Windows 7, Windows 8, any of those systems, it's going to run on absolutely fine. The thing is though, in terms of a practical sense, yeah, don't go and buy a Pentium Dual Core. Most of the times you'll find these, they are, as I said earlier, e-waste. You'll find them bundled in with motherboards that you buy, you'll find them thrown away, they are so easy to get a hold of. But you know what? I don't despise the Pentium Dual Core, and it's given me some interesting data because the whole reason I've done this is because, well, I'm actually meant to be covering the Pentium D at some point, but I need a better system. So having some good data on its real terms replacement, at least something that could offer similar performance to it but on a modern architecture, is going to be very useful. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video. It really did spiral up in length. I got a bit carried away with myself with how much testing I ended up doing. The only reason for this is because I was going to bin this video off, but then I put out that community post and so many people were asking about certain things about it. They were talking about overclocking them back in the day, and I thought I'd be doing a disservice to people if I didn't, put together a slightly better system out of components I had on hand and actually complete the video. So I hope you've all enjoyed. Thank you all very much for watching, and good night.